So starting off, as the large numbers of empty seats imply, not only is Monday the midterm, but today is not a topic that will be covered on the midterm. So in case you want to flee right now, here's your chance. I won't be upset. But what we do here is look at our last topic of our buckets, in this case, our neurobiology one. And the whole premise for this one is to cover the most wonderful, interesting parts of the brain, which you're going to hear squat about when you wind up in medical school. Again, from the other day, what they will teach you about endlessly is stuff that goes wrong with your spinal cord, or stuff that goes wrong with parts of your brain that regulate your bladder and your balance and motoric stuff. How come? Because yes, you can't hear a thing. No. Okay, somebody's off to get sound, but in the meantime, I will pantomime bladder problems. So what you've got, I will try, maybe in the back, just start waving each time I start hypoventilating and run out of volume. But what you got here is not the part of the nervous system that's easy to find out about because it's right on the surface. Not the part that people focus on because there's a lot of spinal cord injuries and you can tell exactly which is what's wrong by which toe is no longer moving. This is instead focusing on the part of the brain most centrally involved in emotion, the limbic system. Now, obvious why that should be of interest to us, more so than spinal pathways controlling movement. And in terms of making sense of the limbic system, this is going to be the most horribly multisyllabic diagram-laden class of the entire class. But in terms of making sense of it, what we will see is there's some very, very logical things going on, very logical strategies. Okay, originally, the limbic system was not known as the limbic system, but instead had a name reflecting the fact that people started off studying it in rats. And you take a rat brain, which looks sort of kind of like this from the side, and you got your spinal cord and cerebellum and cortex. And what is this thing at the way front there? This is the olfactory bulb. This is the olfactory system of a rodent brain. And this is drawn exactly to scale, down to the millimeter. This is huge. This thing is huge, the olfactory bulb, and its projections are 40% of the brain of a rodent. And when people began to understand where the neurons in the olfactory bulb were sending their projections, it was an area of the brain, the underside of the brain, which people very quickly began to call this region the rhinencephalon, the nose brain, because obviously, this is what was processing all this whomping great amount of olfactory information coming in. And this area that we now know and love as the limbic system at the time was called the rhinencephalon. This dominated early on with the neuroanatomists, which is to say the people who just sat there and said, gee whiz, that's an awfully large part of the brain there. And where does it send its projections? As people instead in the 30s and 40s began to understand the function of this part of the brain, what emerged was a very different viewpoint from a different school, which is it's doing all sorts of stuff with emotion. And this picture of this region of the brain as having that role for reasons I don't completely understand. Somehow the people who liked the it's all about emotion started calling it the limbic system. And thus you had one of the most central conflicts of the 20th century, which was whether this thing should be called the rhinencephalon or the limbic system. And thousands of innocent people were slaughtered before it was all over with. Brother pitted against brother, savagery. And what we've got, much of Picasso's paintings were about some of the atrocities committed by the rhinencephalon people. But what wound up ultimately happening was a completely logical resolution. Rhinencephalon, limbic system, is it about odor? Is it about emotion? And all you have to do is think like an ethologist and you got your answer, which is if you're a rat, there's not an emotion on earth that's not intertwined with olfaction. The rat's emotional world is utterly driven by olfactory information, and thus for a rat, the rhinencephalon, the nose brain, is the part of the brain getting all the information coming in that has any relevance to the good, interesting, emotional stuff going on in a rat's life. So this massive resolution, piece in their time, suddenly this recognition that, of course, a rhinencephalon is going to be sending projections, is going to be all a part of the brain that's doing emotion for you. Now, of course, as well-trained ethologists, you should immediately be having a relevant thought already, which is, well, so what's up with the rhinencephalon famed nose brain limbic system in a species that's not some smelly rodent thing? In a species, for example, that's paying attention to enormous amount of, say, auditory stuff. How about all those birds with the bird song business going on, or auditory displays of territoriality or things of that sort? And you look in those brains, and the limbic system is not the rhinencephalon in terms of what part of the brain is disproportionately enlarged and what part of the brain is sending projections into the limbic system. Look at a bird brain, and it is not a rhinencephalon, it's a earencephalon or something or other, and you got to think like an ethologist. And suddenly you're in a world where something as bizarre as electric fish, who communicate socially through electricity, have electroreceptors, which are sending a lot of information to this part of the brain. It is not the nose brain, it is the, among other things, getting whatever sensory information is most pertinent to my emotional life part of the brain. So the limbic system, initially utterly viewed as intertwined with olfaction, now instead recognizing as good neuroethologists what it's really about. Okay, so as an introduction to it, we need to start off with a very simplified, quick overview of large parts of the nervous system. You got bits of this last week, but just to give an initial overview here, just to orient what's happening. And what we see here, and again, a very accurate, technically drawn diagram, you see the brain comes in 3 different pieces, and each one has a different color. And this reflects the work of a guy named Paul MacLean, one of the giants in the field, and everyone is required to say his name at this point. And this model that he came up with in the 1950s or so, the triune brain, the 3-layer model of what brain function is about. So what you have is the most central, ancient, archaic, most phylogenetically conserved, which is a fancy way of saying that all sorts of vertebrates out there, this part of the brain is basically the same. This is the hypothalamus talking to the pituitary. This is the pathways going from the hypothalamus down the spinal cord, areas called brain stem, midbrain. This is what MacLean called the reptilian part of the brain, reflecting the fact that our section here is a whole lot like the type you would find in a reptile. This is the ancient stuff that does the purely automatic regulatory things. You've got neurons here that have to tell you something about temperature regulation. Ooh, back to that neuroendocrinology stuff. Let's see, what's a hormone that's got something to do with metabolism, body temperature, thyroid hormone? So you remember the hypothalamus being part of that cascade. The hypothalamus has a relevant hormone for the pituitary, which then tells your thyroid gland, all of that. So how does the hypothalamus need to know what's going on? That same feedback information stuff from the other day, there's got to be neurons in the hypothalamus that can tell your temperature. And too cold, let's get some more thyroid hormone out. Great, that makes complete sense in terms of regulatory loops, totally boring. Okay, so this is a part of the brain that keeps your body temperature right. It keeps your blood glucose levels sort of modulated in some ways. It talks a lot to the pancreas. It does stuff like it's monitoring your blood pressure in various places. It's remembering that you're running hard, so let's tell the heart to beat a little bit faster. Completely boring stuff. Just robotic regulatory circuitry and loops there. So this is this ancient reptilian part of the brain. Totally boring part of the brain until you get something wrong with that part of the brain, and suddenly it seems mighty interesting. Remind me, how many of you were in BioCore? Okay, lots of folks. People in there will remember I told you about one of the all-time creepy diseases that you do not want to get, which is called Odine's curse, which is where you get some lesion, some stroke damage to one of these midbrain areas, this part of the brain that does something very boring until it doesn't do it for you anymore. Odine was apparently some Greek nymph or something that Zeus was hitting on unsuccessfully at some point, and greatly frustrated, he put this Olympian curse on her, which was that she had Odine's curse, or maybe Odine's curse was what she had to say about him in return. But what this was about is she lost the capacity to do automatic breathing. Whoa, that's a drag. Automatic breathing, and that you're just sort of going along there breathing now and then, and we do that pretty aptly as opposed to ineptly. And what you don't have to do is stop and say, well, this would be a good time to expand my diaphragm or whatever it is you do there, but you've got a lesion in this part of the brain and you lose the capacity for automatic breathing. Okay, somebody who's not in BioCore, tell me, what do you die of if you have Odine's curse? Oh, who just mumbled that? Asphyxiation. Good. Okay. And at what particular time? Yeah. Or you actually don't die of asphyxiation when you're falling asleep. How come? Because you keep waking up. You fall asleep, and 30 seconds later, you wake up because you're on the edge of asphyxiation. You die of sleep deprivation. How's that for one creepy thing to have happen to you? So you can start obsessing over that as an eventual problem. Here's the boring part of the brain, this reptilian stuff. We do this part of the brain exactly the same way that lizards do. Sitting on top of it is the area that we now put all of our attention and love upon, which is the limbic system, this emotional part of the brain, which we will soon see in sickening detail. The limbic system is mostly a mammalian invention. Birds, reptiles, fish do not have especially complex emotional lives. Uh-oh, there's people from Russ Fernald's lab in here. Do not tell him I just said that. But yeah, not a word about it. Okay, but it is mostly a mammalian invention, greatly expanding the limbic system, emotional complexity. Stay tuned. The next hour and a half is about what is much more subtle than saying, ooh, this does emotions for you. Sitting on top is the cortex, the gleaming analytical machine of cortical function and cognitive expertise that we have. This is something that all sorts of species out there, fish and birds and not bees, but birds and almost bees. And what you got there is one that nonetheless is greatly expanded in vertebrates and mammals, and greatly expanded even more so in primates, and even more so than us. And as we will see, one area of the cortex, which is really very uniquely human and very intertwined with the limbic system. As we'll see, what is critical in making sense of the cortex with respect to all this stuff, this limbic emotion behavior stuff, and everything coming for the rest of the course, is the rumors of the cortex being this rational, independent, analytical part of the brain that goes about its business while all this hormonal, emotional muck is going on south of it, is completely wrong. All sorts of aspects of cortical function are being influenced by hormones, and thus indirectly under the regulation of here, all sorts of aspects of cortical function are being influenced by the limbic system. And all you have to do to appreciate that is think back on times of extreme emotional duress and arousal where you made some incredibly stupid decision that seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. Therein is proof that your limbic system is able to influence decision-making going on up in the cortex. And as we will see, of great relevance to us as a fancy species, the cortex has vast ability to influence stuff going on below there. And all you need to do to prove that is sit and think about the fact that you are not going to live forever. And suddenly this part of the brain is going to be kicking out CRH and things like that. And you've just done it with thought. There's bidirectionality that completely does in the notion that here's the emotional part of the brain, here's the cognitive part, and that's completely wrong that they're separable. major figure in the field, a guy named Antonio Damasio, who's probably the best thinker about any of this stuff, had a book a number of years ago called Descartes' Error. Descartes, who saw that there was this great potential separation between thought and emotion, and that's complete nonsense. So starting off merely on an anatomical level, which is to say which neurons where are sending axonal projections where else, tons and tons of crosstalk between the limbic system and the cortex. Okay, so we now have this utterly undefined mass of limbic system, and we also have a tabula rasa there, but here it is. Okay, but what you've got is, of course, subparts of the limbic system. Subparts out the wazoo. There are people who spend their entire lives arguing about whether this subnuclei of this part of the brain should logically be considered as having 7 subparts or 8 subparts. Extremely complicated part of the brain. And what we'll be looking at here is the circuitry. The circuitry and what each individual subregion of the limbic system does. All of this got sorted out in the 1930s or so by a neurologist named James Papes. And I think there remains enormous controversy over whether his name is pronounced Papes or Papez, but probably neither is correct. But what you wound up getting as a result of his work was the first person to begin to think in a systematic way of, hey, all of these structures in that old rhinencephalon part of the brain, all of these structures are sending projections to each other. This seems to be some organized module of interconnected function. And it was around that time that people began to be seeing what some of the effects were, what some of the roles of these were behavior, and suddenly out comes this is the emotional part of the brain. And the circuitry that's since been delineated is known as the Papes circuit or the Papez circuit or the whatever the guy's name was circuit, and we will see that shortly. He was the first person to begin to see, just on the level of connections, that this is an area that seems to be doing a lot of interrelated functions. Quick definition, what do we mean by doing connections? Again, back to last week's introductory stuff. A connection, a projection, neurons in this part of the brain are sending their axons to that part of the brain and forming synapses there. This area projects to that area. So where are the projections, where are the connections to translate this neuroanatomy concept into sort of the most accessible level? What parts of the brain are talking to this region? And what parts of the brain is this region talking to? Where are the axons coming from, and where are these neurons' axons heading off to? So circuitry in that regard. So this is going to be an enormously complicated circuit, but at the end of the day, there is one way to think about it, which is unifying, which clarifies everything, which is the thing that every single nucleus and subnucleus and subsubnucleus in the limbic system, the thing that everything in the limbic system wants to do is tell the hypothalamus what to do. The entire limbic system is structured around trying to influence hypothalamic function. There's all those connections going to the cortex and other areas as well. But for first pass, the way to conceptualize the limbic system is it tries to influence what the hypothalamus is up to. Why would that be interesting? You know that from last week. Hypothalamus is the central hub for all of that neuroendocrine stuff, and thus the entire world of your brain wanting to influence behavior and emotion in any sort of endocrine context, you're going to have to be talking down here. From earlier last week, hypothalamus also playing a pivotal role in the autonomic nervous system coming down the spine, the whole world in which emotions change how your body works is all about the limbic system telling the hypothalamus what to do. And thus what you see is all the circuitry in here is built around trying to influence hypothalamic function in a certain way as follows, which will make perfect sense, which is what every single area of the limbic system wants to do is tell the hypothalamus what to do. And in addition, the other thing that it really wants to do is make sure no other part of the limbic system is telling the hypothalamus what to do. And thus you've got all sorts of areas with means of stimulating regions of the hypothalamus and inhibiting the activity of other limbic regions. So you've got all these patterns here of stimulating down there, inhibiting here, all built around these different regions wanting to influence hypothalamic function. So amid it being a total, complete mess of circuitry, one rule helps you begin to sort out the details, which is, okay, so you've got this area of the limbic system, and it wants to influence the hypothalamus at the end of the day. How many synapses away is the hypothalamus? How many neurons are intervening between this part of the limbic system having something to say, getting action potentials, and influencing something in the hypothalamus? This winds up being a pretty good rule of thumb in terms of looking at influence. You send a projection straight into the hypothalamus. In other words, you are one synapse away, and you're going to be having a lot more control over what's going on there than if you have to send a projection here, which sends one there and there and bouncing around, and 14 synapses later, you're influencing hypothalamic function. How come? Well, for one thing, one synapse away, you're going to be a lot faster. And the other reason being, if there's 14 synapses in between, everybody downstream of you is going to have their own opinion about things, and it turns into a game of telephone. The most direct way of influencing hypothalamic function is to have as few synapses in your projection as possible. And thus what you see is most limbic regions have a number of different ways of getting information down to the hypothalamus, and they differ in the number of synapses, and thus they differ in their power. And what we'll see is just one example here. We'll do that later. Okay, so lots of examples of that. Just to give you a sense about something interesting in us, in terms of this rule of how many synapses away. So we've got this limbic part of the brain, and back to that rhinencephalon business, that, you know, rodents are super olfactory, and fish do whatever they do, and again, don't tell Fernald, and all these other species have their, and we're not a particularly olfactory species. Here's something interesting. Every single one of your sensory modalities has to go through a minimum of 3 or 4 synapses to first plunk down any influence in the limbic system, except for our olfactory systems, which are 1 synapse away from the limbic system. So even us, we are not terribly olfactory, and we've got atrophied olfactory bulbs. That's a rat. Our olfactory system takes up less than 5% of our brain. Nonetheless, olfaction is 1 synapse away from the limbic system, telling you something about that whole world, that visual information can tell you a lot about calculus equations. Olfaction is the thing that flashes us back to some emotional setting. That's the reason for it. Great example of this, counting the number of synapses strategies. The fewer synapses, the more influence. So what are the structures of the limbic system? First pass, unfortunately, it is going to make sense to learn all the details of these different subregions, because you will be hearing about all of them again. You won't be hearing about them Monday night, but you'll be hearing about them all in the next month or so. And so learn this stuff. Okay, so what's going on in the limbic system? What is inside here? What we've got are the major structures of the limbic system. Sitting in there, you recognize the pituitary, and thus sitting right on top of that is the hypothalamus. And here we have all these other regions. First off, the amygdala. The amygdala, I have already mentioned it a number of times in class. We will hear details soon about what it does. You've already heard some intimations of it. So the amygdala is this cluster of neurons, beginning to get another anatomical concept here. You've got nuclei, clusters of neuronal cell bodies, and you have projections, areas of lots of axons. So you will have a whole lot of cell bodies here, and sending their projections off there, you will wind up seeing this as a densely packed area of cell bodies. Each one of these areas I will be mentioning now are areas where the cell bodies are, nuclei. Interesting elaboration, as you also learned last week. One of the things that makes action potentials go really fast is that business about myelin, myelination. These are very membranous wrappings around, membrane, very fatty membrane lipid stuff, which happens to be white in color. Cell bodies tend to be gray in color. And this is where the dichotomy comes in brain science between gray matter and white matter parts of the brain. Gray matter are nuclei, cell bodies packed in there. White matter are cables of axons going from one place to another, wrapped in myelin. So just translating that into sort of terms that we're familiar with. Okay, so starting off, the first nucleus of the limbic system, the amygdala. The amygdala, if you study neuroanatomy, most of these places come with some terms derived from Latin or Greek or something or other. And the amygdala means almond. It means almond. A number of years ago, I reported that it means peach pit, and that turned out to be wrong. And I was also wrong as to whether it was Greek or Latin. I probably should have written that down from 2 years ago, but from some stupid old classic language, this means almond, and it looks like an almond. Okay, next we have in front of it the hippocampus. Hippocampus, which we will hear lots about as well. And you will see the hippocampus is a big structure spanning over there, relevant to its function. Hippocampus, Latin for seahorse. But if you look at the hippocampus, it doesn't look at all like a seahorse, suggesting neuroanatomists don't go out to the beach anywhere near as often as would be a good idea. It actually looks like a jelly roll. But people who spoke Latin didn't know about jelly rolls, and thus they had to see horses. So you got the hippocampus here. We will shortly be seeing how these two communicate with each other, where the axons are going between these nuclei. Next, an area called the septum. And there's a number of septums in the body. Septum is a term for a midline structure. You have a septum separating the two nostrily parts of your nose. The center of the four chambers of your heart is a septum. Septum here is a structure that's right at the midbrain, at the midline of the brain. Then we have, just tucked behind the hippocampus, something called the mammillary bodies. Yeah, you got to know these terms. You will eventually be so grateful for having all this stupid terminology under your belt. It will make the rest of your life far richer. Okay, so you got mammillary body here. Sitting on top of that is a remarkable structure that you probably could have intuited was there, because you know about the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, what does that mean? It means it's the thing that's under the thalamus. I bet you there's something a little bit north of there called the thalamus, and here it is, which is possibly also known as the supra hypothalamus, but instead it's known as the thalamus, and we will see some stuff that it does. Next are two very interesting areas, which we will hear tons about in lectures to come, in particular the lectures on depression, a region called the ventral tegmental area, and a region called the nucleus accumbens. Every one of these is in the handout. Don't freak out about trying to get down the terms at this point, just at least get the abbreviations. Here are the major players in the limbic system, with one addition. And this is one that bedeviled the field for a long time and reflected a very great piece of insight. A neuroanatomist back who sort of was in his prime in the latter part of the last century, a guy named Wally Nauta, a Dutch guy who was arguably the best neuroanatomist of sort of the last half of the 20th century. And in the 1950s, studying neural connectiveness, what he came up with was a totally nutty idea, because at that point, we were about 10, 20 years into the limbic concept. These are subcortical areas involved in emotion, and they all send projections to each other. And Nauta, based on looking at the anatomy, what parts of the brain were sending projections where, what parts were getting projections from where, Nauta said one part of the cortex should actually be classified as part of the limbic system. Oh, this was heresy. He was driven out of the neuroanatomy club, and he was insisting that this made sense anatomically and predicted it would make sense eventually functionally, and he was totally right. The most interesting area of the cortex, a region called the frontal cortex, also known as the prefrontal cortex. An obviously real distinction there. We will ignore that distinction. An area, the frontal cortex, including a sub-area called the anterior cingulate. This is a part of the cortex which is intimately interconnected with all these subcortical regions. It is arguably the cortical component of the limbic system. Why is that the case? We will see amid lots of cortex doing stuff, like telling you, is it here that you were just stimulated, or was it there? Did somebody just play an A or an A flat? Which limb do I want to move right now? All sorts of nuts and bolts stuff. How do I do long division? All those things. The frontal cortex has this world of utterly uncortex-like things that it's interested in: emotional regulation, impulse control, long-term planning, gratification postponement. It is without question the most interesting part of the brain. And I say that as someone who's just spent like the last 30 years of my life just obsessing over the hippocampus, and I was wrong. The hippocampus has done well by me. I have been faithful to it, but nonetheless, it has struck me more and more that this is where I should have been sitting, because this is, oh, so much more interesting part of the brain than some dumb old area that remembers stuff for you. Frontal cortex is what makes us most definedly human. It is proportionately larger in humans than in any other species. It is the most recently evolved. Something that we will hear about in coming weeks is it's the last part of the brain to fully mature. Most of you in here do not yet have a frontal cortex, which is fully online, which is an amazing thing. Frontal cortex isn't fully myelinated until in your mid-20s on the average. This is not, oh, you were born with all these neural connections. This is a part of the brain that does impulse control for you, and it is not working yet very well in most of you guys for a while to come. I don't know what this explains, but it no doubt explains a great deal. This is an incredibly interesting part of the brain, which has nothing to do with, oh, let's turn that sensory information into a three-dimensional map and I could recognize whose face it is. And this instead is a cortical area utterly intertwined with what's going on in the limbic system. One interesting measure of it, which is looking at this frontal part of the cortical brain, and an interesting measure work done by a guy named Ian Dunbar some years ago, looking at, by now, about 150 different primate species, and in each one asking what percentage of the brain is made up by this prefrontal cortex, how much of the brain is devoted to it. And what he showed across 150 different primate species, the single best predictor of how big the frontal cortex was going to be was how large is the average social group for this species. In other words, you sitting around in some species where you've got to keep track of 3 other people in there, or you live in a species where there's 150 individuals in your troop, and the latter species is going to have proportionally a far bigger frontal cortex. What this suggests on a certain level is this utterly defining part of the brain evolved for gossip and social relations and appropriate behavior and social intelligence and all sorts of stuff like that. Truly interesting part of the brain, utterly intertwined with the traditional limbic region. So this Nauta guy was completely correct. Okay, so now adding in the next layer of miserable factoids you need to have, which will show sort of the same principles I've been talking about, which is how these areas connect with each other. At this point, it has basically been shown that every limbic region projects to, sends axons to, some other limbic region. I'm just going to put in some of the main pathways here. First one, called the amygdalofugal pathway, which carries information back and forth between the amygdala and hippocampus. Amygdaloid neurons projecting to the hippocampus, hippocampal neurons projecting back. And as we will see, an awful lot of what the amygdala is involved with, I think I've mentioned already, fear, anxiety, learning to be afraid of particular stimuli. A lot of what the hippocampus does is help you remember stuff. This connection between them is critical when you are learning that every time the Russian guy with the beard puts the light on, you're going to get a shock, and then you're going to have to salivate when he tells you there's food coming. What the amygdala is doing there is hijacking the hippocampus at that time to have hippocampus do some memory formation for you about a fearful stimulus. So interconnections there that are extremely important. Next, we've got the hippocampus needing to talk to the septum. And it does so with a series of projections, bidirectional again, called the fimbria fornix. Fornix, here's showing just how much fun neuroanatomy can be. Fornix is from Latin or Greek or whatever for arch. And apparently it comes from referring to the Roman Colosseum. And supposedly this is the origins of another word that during classical Roman times, this is where prostitutes would be. So people who would say they were going off there would be going off to the arches, off to fornicate. That's the origins of that. So isn't this such a cool subject? So here we got the fornix there, completing this arch, hippocampus talking to septum. Septum then sending a huge projection coming down to the hypothalamus, back onto the mammillary bodies, and projections going back this way as well, a major limbic pathway called the medial forebrain bundle. Okay, just to make things more complicated now, we now have another projection from the amygdala that goes straight to the hypothalamus. And this is a total pain. This is a pathway called the striae terminalis. And by all logic, what it should do is go from here to there. No, that's not what it does. Here's what the striae terminalis does. It starts in the amygdala and it goes looping just on the outside of the hippocampus around this way and lands back there. What's up with that? That is ridiculous. What you see here is a principle about a lot of this neurobiological wiring stuff, which is you get totally nutty, inefficient, going out through left field projections. How did that happen? What that tells you is at some point embryologically, these two structures were not so close to each other. And part of embryonic development involved flipping over like this. And suddenly the amygdala is right next door long after it made the most efficient possible connection by way of this. And now you got this completely nutty way to get around there. So often you see really inefficient pieces of wiring here telling you something about embryonic development. Some of the time, you also see nutty pieces of wiring telling you something about the evolutionary history of this nervous system. Here's one example, and this is one outside of the limbic system, but great demonstration of this having to do with some motor systems in the brain. Okay, you're here and you decide what you would like to do is bend this one finger. What would be the logical thing? Some part of the cortex up here involved in motor control that we're not interested in should send a message down to this finger saying bend. No, that's not what happens. One part of this motor system called the pyramidal nervous system sends a message to all 5 of your fingers saying, do this. Meanwhile, there's another motor system called the extrapyramidal system that quickly sends down a signal and says, if you happen to hear the pyramidal system tell fingers 1, 3, 4, and 5 to bend, don't pay attention to it. And suddenly you got this going on. Like, what is this? A committee that came up with this? This is totally crazy, inefficient wiring until you think about the evolution of the system. As follows, there's not a whole lot of species out there that have a need in terms of reproductive success to play trills on the piano. There's not a whole lot of species that have to do independent movement of fingers. The basic wiring of this motor system is one of this crude pyramidal system of just sending messages down the line there, extend claws, retract, all that sort of thing. And along come primates and raccoons and a few other things that suddenly get in their heads to move fingers independently. So you got a choice at that point. You can either renovate the entire pyramidal system and rip it out and rewire so that each finger is controlled independently, and that's never going to work because the contractor doesn't show up and it's been a million years. Or what you do is you have to come up with a second, newer system that's superimposed on top. Totally ass backwards, inefficient way of it. What does that tell you? The extrapyramidal system is more recently evolved. It is more of a primate system. And that's where you get the fine control. What you often see is bits of really clunky wiring and regulation. Tells you things about embryonic life, and it tells you about evolution. Back to this classic quote, which is, evolution is not an inventor, evolution is a tinkerer. It is just playing with what's already there and trying to come up with something better. That was the idea from lectures ago, which all things considered, squid do not swim anywhere near as fast as barracuda, but for something that used to be a barnacle, they're pretty good swimmers. You have to realize where things started and where the adaptations came from. Okay, so more wiring. And now we've got the mammillary bodies talking to the thalamus, the mammillothalamic tract. And then you've got the thalamus talking bidirectionally with the frontal cortex. So you begin to see the starts here of kind of a looping circuit and going bidirectionally, all of that. Two additional areas, this ventral tegmental area and this nucleus accumbens. Ventral tegmentum sends a lot of information here, and from on there, it goes to every single place, and we will eventually see great relevance of that bidirectionally. Okay, so horrible circuitry. What you should already see is one example of what I was telling you about before, counting number of synapses. So you're the amygdala, and you want to tell the hypothalamus what to do. You got a choice. You can do it by way of this striae terminalis thing, which is one synapse away, or you could do it by talking to the hippocampus, which talks to the septum, which talks to the hypothalamus. Where's the most important stuff coming out of the amygdala to the hypothalamus? By way of this striae terminalis. What's this communication about? A lot of the time it's the amygdala trying to get the hippocampus to shut up so the amygdala can dominate hypothalamic events. That begins to show this principle of how many synapses away. So we have all of this incredible wiring here. And again, every single one of these, there's other minor ones there as well, and they all interconnect with each other, but these are some of the major ones. Does this make sense? How about now? Okay, so that's the limbic system in terms of basic wiring. So what everyone needs to do now is spend the next 5 minutes filling in what those abbreviations were for, and then we will finally get past this stupid A sends to B and begin to look at function. Okay, so 5 minutes. Okay, so pushing on, good question that just came up, relevant to BioCore people. So what I just said, that business about the olfactory system is one synapse away from the limbic system. Isn't it totally amazing? Remember BioCore stuff, that business, the visual cortex, the first layer that does dots, the second layer does lines at certain angles, all that's where you're getting all the synapses coming in, which delay you from getting information into there. Auditory system has the same multi-layer processing. Tactile, all of those are like that, except for olfaction. That drops its first signaling right off into the amygdala. So very, very different circuitry. Okay, so now finally getting to function. So how do you figure out the function of the limbic system? A bunch of different techniques, bunch of different experimental techniques. First, you have the greatest thing that has been most helpful in all of the history of neuroscience in understanding how different parts of the brain work, which is endless warfare. Because what that gives you are people who have had parts of their brain blown out of the water there. You have, nice jargon, missile wounds. So after every big, good, fun, energetic war, all sorts of neuroanatomists get their careers like jump-started for years afterward, studying people who have had parts of the brain lesioned, damaged, destroyed by circumstances like that. But, you know, any old-time neuroanatomist are delighted to get a hold of somebody who's had a brain region damage. There's one guy, in fact, everybody has heard of HM. I suspect anybody not heard of HM? Okay, so you've all heard of HM. There's another guy, NA. NA has his septum taken out. And what happened to NA? All that it ever says in the literature was that he was at a wedding and his septum was destroyed by a miniature fencing foil. That's it. That's the literature on what happened to NA. So NA, you know, was a draft dodger in endless different wars, and then he gets done in by like sister-in-law's wedding kind of thing, but lesions. Lesions are critical. So human studies where you have had accidental damage to brain regions, or the rare, horrifying world where there was damage done to human brains intentionally, back to class 1, the frontal lobotomy business. Just to clarify, frontal lobotomies in its classic form was not lesioning the prefrontal cortex. It was just putting a big old cut somewhere through there that took out limbic structures, given the fact that most frontal lobotomies were being done, I kid you not, with an ice axe. That was the tool of choice for the neurosurgeons. This was not a very precise surgical technique, but it was taking out all sorts of limbic structures. So the rare world of intentional lesions in humans, HM being the rare version of that where it was done for a valid clinical reason. Much more often in the lesion world is taking experimental animals where you go in and you selectively destroy some region. And the strategy, whether in humans or animals, is absolutely obvious, which is, okay, if we destroy this part of the brain, what doesn't work right anymore? Ooh, we've just found out something about what that part of the brain does. Next strategy, classic one. Now, instead of lesioning a brain region, you put down an electrode where you stimulate that region. You artificially generate action potentials there. This is a brain region that gets projections from here. And this region is not saying anything whatsoever. There are no activity here to send action potentials. Nothing's happening. And what you're doing instead is by sticking an electrode in there and stimulating, you are simulating an input there. Stimulate and now see what happens. Ooh, we've just learned something about that part of the brain. Rarely done with humans, except for epileptics with severe types of intractable epilepsy, where a certain type of neurosurgery is done to correct it, and it's often quite effective. On the way down, the electrodes going down, often the neurosurgeons stimulate on the way down to be assured that they're in the right place. Okay, next version. Now instead, you put down an electrode, and that one's a recording electrode. What that one is telling you is, so you're down in here, when are these neurons getting electrically excited? Or putting it in here, when are action potentials pulsing through this part of the brain, picking up what's going on? And what really winds up being fancy are people who, for example, can put a stimulating electrode down here and a recording electrode there, that sort of thing. There's a whole world of incredibly adept people who could record from one single neuron at a time. Or how's about this? Back to those neurotransmitter receptors coupled to an ion channel that opens up and stuff goes in or out. There is a technique called patch clamping where people can record from one single ion channel at a time, which is just madness that people could do this. But in terms of the resolution, all of these techniques artificially get neurons excited electrically, see what happens next, put in a recording device to tell you what's happening, and thus you begin to do things like, ooh, every time I do this with my hand, these neurons get action potentials. We've just learned something pertinent there. What else? Another realm of techniques you've already heard about, which is this plain old boring anatomy. Which part of the brain sends axons to this part of the brain? How many synapses away? All of the means of deriving information that we heard about before. So that's the whole world of just looking at the circuitry, telling you about function from that. Then, of course, there's a whole world of biochemical stuff. You are measuring levels of things. You are measuring levels of neurotransmitters, molecular biology, seeing where different genes are being expressed. If you see genes that are only expressed in this part of the limbic system under some circumstance, you've just learned something about its function. All that sort of thing. Finally, a world where you could do really interesting, trendy stuff with humans in terms of seeing what's up in the limbic system, where what you do is you can image brain regions. And this is now a whole world of, instead of sitting around waiting for somebody to die and slice their brain up afterward, instead you could do imaging, CAT scans, CT scans, MRI, where you see the areas of different parts of the brain, how big or small they are. You can look at the metabolic rate in certain areas of the brain, which is sort of the equivalent of recording. Stick in an electrode and you can tell what's happening here by when there's electrical excitation. Use functional brain imaging and you can tell what's happening here by when suddenly there's more oxygen or glucose being consumed here. Same sort of information. With the imaging, though, you're getting a picture of the entire brain all at once. And one of the cool things that's come out of those studies is showing that some regions of the brain, particularly the limbic system, will change their size over time. One example, which I think we've heard about already, which is that the amygdala gets bigger in people with post-traumatic stress disorder, severe traumatic history, and this part of the brain expands. People with PTSD, amygdalas are larger. You look at the metabolic rate in the amygdala, people with PTSD, it is more metabolically reactive than other areas of the brain, or than in people who don't have PTSD. So that's just told you something interesting. Nice cellular basis of that. Periods of severe stress cause neurons in the amygdala to grow more dendritic processes. That's probably why the amygdala gets bigger. So that's the sort of thing that gets picked up on humans with brain imaging. Another version over in the hippocampus, just as pertinent to some of the stuff we will hear about, people with long-term major depression, their hippocampus gets smaller. Their hippocampus atrophies a bit. And the same sort of information being picked up, you see an area of the brain that is plastic enough, that is malleable enough, that its size will change in response to certain types of experiences or emotional states. You just learn something about what that part of the brain does. So that winds up being extremely informative when there's differences in the size of different brain regions in response to experience. Okay, so that's generally the set of tools that are available to people trying to figure out what's going on in the limbic system. And all of these tools come with some important limitations. These are limitations if what you're trying to do is figure out what this part of the spinal column does instead of that part, because you need to figure out all sorts of caveats in there. If that's hard, it is a gazillion times harder to use some of these techniques to make sense of emotion and emotional memories and things of that sort. What are some of the difficulties in interpreting data from all the results we just heard about? Here is one problem. Okay, every day, unbeknownst to you guys, there are 2 to 3 dozen huge tractor trailer trucks that start at dawn from Gilroy and bring us our garlic that is used in all of the dorm dining rooms. Every single morning that happens, thousands of pounds that are consumed in the dorm, and you are trying to understand where in California is the garlic generating center, the garlic nucleus, and what you've been selectively doing is carpet bombing certain areas in Northern California, and as a result of a direct hit on 101, no more garlic shows up at Leland Stanford Junior University. So what have you just concluded? 101 somewhere right around Laser Quest is exactly where the center is for producing garlic in Northern California. And that's the only plausible scientific conclusion you can reach. What we have here is the problem of centers versus fibers of passage. Have you just, in a lesion study, found out something about a region, you've destroyed it, and something doesn't work normally? Is that because you've taken out the neurons, the cell bodies in the true center, or have you inadvertently cut a fiber passage? Have you blown out 101 and endless mistakes made over the years early on in neuroanatomy? People failing to distinguish between lesions of nuclei versus lesions of pathways. What really winds up being hard is when you have nuclei with cell bodies and at the same time fibers passing through from someplace else. That's what this medial forebrain bundle is about. Cell nuclei all over the place, but at the same time, fibers passing through. When you do a lesion in a place like that, you can't tell whether it's the cell bodies, the nucleus aspects, the center that you're taking out, or whether you have just taken out a fiber of passage. Enormously difficult stuff to do. Okay, so that's one constraint. Once you get through that and you figured out, ooh, this really is a center, this really is the cell bodies rather than just the axons, then you deal with this issue of what does a center mean in the brain? Yeah, this may be the center, the part of the brain that moves this finger instead of this one. That may be a pertinent concept. Ooh, this is the center of the brain for feeling depressed amid a bittersweet gratitude for the unexpected pleasures of life, which are felt in a poignant context, making you smell.
It's all quite fascinating. Hello. Is this thing on? Still charging my headphones. Let's chillax. So I'll just relax, calm down. Holy shit. Who are all you people? Skyworks? William? Richard? Sammy? Good to see you. Come on down if you like. I got placed squarely in the middle of a disagreement that is not mine. And I don't care. What's up, Jason? If I didn't say hi to Jason. Jason, Skyworks, Richard, William, did I miss Sammy? I'll do it again. Do it all over again. And so, yeah, that happened. And it's a mystery to me. I just, don't let anybody on your channel. It's dangerous. People might, end up disliking you for reasons that are not your own. So, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. There's a link in there. I'm fucking dead. I'm fucking dead. I could not complete that fucking course tonight. Like I was like, no, I'm in the mood. I'm gonna be sarcastic, and I really don't need to be sarcastic on this whole. I need to pass this test, so let's not do that tonight. And we'll finish that another time. Yeah. So, hold your shit in, gentlemen. Just contain your shit. Whatever you have to do, just put it up in there. I got something funny for you. You want to see something funny? I find it fucking hilarious, but that's just me. I've been following this for a little bit. I don't really have anything other than that to say. I just got out of the bath. Splish splash, I was taking a bath. And I just decided, you know what? Fuck that. I'm not going to leave it at that. I like Will and Ox and Beck. Richard, you haven't done anything to agitate the situation from what I've seen, but fuck y'all for putting me in the middle of it. No, come over here and debate, bro. I will host that motherfucker. Don't waste my fucking time. I'm gonna be all, no, I don't know what, I understand what happened, but I don't understand why the continuing, I At some point, you gotta fucking drop it. Who's gonna fucking drop it? Just drop that shit. Let it go. It's not that fucking important. But whatever. It's none of my business. I didn't do it. All right, let's look for that fucking video. It's even less my business, and I can just, see my way out of it. Or you can come in if you want to. Anybody can come in. We're just hanging out. That's all we're doing here. What? Oh, I see what happened. It's just the thumbnail. And I actually have a timestamp today where I want to come in. If I can find a minute. We didn't even go that long. 46 minutes? Okay. I thought he would have gone on longer. He had a Sowing and Reaping went live like immediately after I stopped the last stream, and I was like, fuck, this is hilarious. I listened to it on my way to the store. Coming back.
But what about recently? Okay. When you had all of that money, what were they doing with that money? They were flaunting it. They were saying, oh, I'm going to do this $1,500 haul. I'm going to do this $3,000 haul. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. They got a little bit of money from the uncle who I believe gave it to them. If it's a YouTuber on here, I don't know about it. I believe that the uncle gave them money. The uncle got them some pizza or whatever and got them whatever they got. And what did they do? They flaunted it. Just imagine if they would have received a couple of $1,000s. What do you think they would have did? They would have flaunted it.
Hello, Richard. Good to see you.
Hello, peace and respect. How is ya?
Peace. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm chilling. I'm just chilling, man. I get at least one day of rest. Well, half a day of rest. Hey, Jody. Sorry, I got Jody inside chat too. Yeah, so a rough morning, but we overcame the obstacles and we got here. And then, yeah. Now I was just talking about the little outburst between Ox and Godless Sewing over here earlier. I don't know if you were witness to that.
I wasn't. I was. Depending on timing, I might have been over at Snake Was Right's channel, Debate Cafe.
Oh no, it was right before
helping.
Yeah.
It was right before that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I was doing right before that.
Yeah, I think Snake came by in the side chat for a minute too, and then Snake went live and Will went live. No, it was like maybe I ended an hour or so before or something like that. I ran a little bit late, but I was supposed to run until 5. I ran until like 5:30, and then they both started roughly at 7. So.
So what happened? Ox and who?
Oh, Godless Sewing. Will.
Godless Sewing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Whatever happened over there with that video getting shared, just he's pretty sore about it, and then It's just
I guess I
it's
just have no idea what's going on anywhere. Sorry.
no, I don't know. It's something. Well, he thinks you're involved, but I guess it's Beck and Ox, according
Who
to
thinks
him,
I'm
that
involved?
shared this video or some shit. So
Who thinks I'm involved?
Will does.
Oh, Will just don't like me. That's all. That's personal.
I've heard that. I've heard that it's personal.
I heard it. I heard it directly from him. I got nothing against the guy, but he don't like me.
I was like, because immediately I was like, I don't want channel drama, and then boom, here comes the channel drama. It's like I just put him in timeout and tried to laugh it off. Like, we'll just come in here and debate, but. Like, honestly, like, I don't want to air that. Do I just want to, like, silence them? Like, no, don't bring it here. Like, I didn't want to take that route. I've done that before. And I was like, fuck it, let him fucking hash it out. But it wasn't happening, No, not you, William Freeman. Different Will, yeah.
Well, Godless has really offended some people that I love, but, that's between them and them. They're all adults. So.
It's just sad that some of that gets aired out, or like, I mean, honestly, like I've been just trying to have chill streams today. Like I'm down for the conversation, for the argument, but when it comes down to, I don't know, it's like a pissing match like that, you get fed up with it after a while. It's like, but
I'm fed up
I
with
don't want to be mad at any of
actually.
the individuals involved because I think that brings me down. You know what I mean? Like. I'm just going to say, if they're having a conflict, it doesn't involve me. It just happened over here. Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad for people if they're upset about something. That's terrible. That's where it stops right there.
Yeah. Spend far too much of our time upset. So what do you think about, do you pay any attention to this drama going on with Shanny and Rev and G-Man or any of that shit?
Yeah, I kind of involuntarily know too much about it. I didn't set out to find out, but people are people, and you just being in the community, you hear stuff,
So I find this interesting. G-Man actually makes a lot of really good points here, but it's like, dude, you have no place to talk. But I don't know. Like, as they say in the video, anybody can review anybody, but I found this portion of the video really funny. Do you mind do you want to let it continue for a little bit? This is one that G-Man, I don't know if he re-released it or he did earlier. It streamed 4 hours ago. Oh no, he did. He personally thanked me in the side chat, so I know he was in it. So yeah. I think this is hilarious.
That's what they would have did. They haven't repented of those things. They haven't decided that I'm no longer going to be like that. I'm not going to live like that no more. They haven't made those, and they love the consequences. Because let me tell you guys something. If they hated those things, their behavior would be totally, totally different. Think about this a minute. Based on the logic that I use, Romans 12, we're supposed to abhor what is evil, right? Let's start off, let's use both of them when it comes to work. Does Shanny and Rev hate being bums? Yes or no? Does Shanny and Rev hate being bums? Yes or no? Does Shanny and Rev hate being bums? Yes or no? And the answer is no.
So he's calling them bums, right? Yeah. Do they hate being bums? Do they hate begging for change on the internet? And then it's like, this is all rhetorical, right? Because he's not actually responding to anything. He's just challenging their character.
Yeah, sure.
So, and I'd say you could say the same thing for like any content creator on the internet. If you're making money on a YouTube channel or Patreon account or whatever, Like, oh, that guy's just no. But I mean, I think that there is a key difference in the way they come on, and pretty much every stream they need funding for something or other, right? Like they do that.
I've heard that.
But how is it? What's the? I guess G-Man just feels ripped off at this point, right? He's just.
I find it interesting that he's going to refer to the Bible in some way, right? And he's going to say something like, you're supposed to earn your own keep, and if you don't work, you don't eat. He's going to say something like that. But that's cherry picking the text, and here's why I think that. Like, what does it make sense to give to the poor if there were no one in need? So
Right.
actually, you kind of need the poor to tithe to, or else you couldn't tithe to anybody. What would that be? Just, people are fairly well off trading 10% of their, here, give me 10% of yours, I'll give you 10% of mine, and we'll call it even. So it makes no sense that way. And then there's this other part in how Christ deals with the apostles, that when they don't understand something, or they think he might even be wrong about something he said, he waits till they wait, and he waits till the event is over. Then they speak in private about it. So what would that mean?
Well, I would see that as that he doesn't want to air the business out, right? So he wants to.
Yeah, looks like mutual respect.
But it's not like done in secret. He's doing it so he doesn't embarrass the person, right?
Right. It's not like I can't tell you what this stuff means from either side. It's more like, hey, I'm not going to ask you in public.
All right. I can dig that.
The answer is no. The answer is no. And I'm going to tell you something. They enjoy being bums. You want to know why? Because they refuse to do anything to change it. Do they love going out there, getting their smokes? Because this is supposed to be their Lord and Savior to take care of all of their problems. Of course, they absolutely love this, but they don't hate it. Because if they hated it, they would stop using it. No, I don't got a Delta 8. I don't have a Delta 8 prop for this one, but I do have this one. Do Shanny and Rev hate smelling the joint up? No, they actually love smelling the joint up because they refuse to take $1.15 and get this, and that's a stick of deodorant. They refuse to. And Shanny, this is how you do it, Shanny. You don't buy it and then throw it in the garbage because it's taking up space. You actually open it up. You know what I mean? You got to remove this thing right here. You got to actually take a shower. You know what I mean? After you take a shower and you dry up, you take this deodorant and you put, you know what I mean? And it lasts X amount of hours before you got to take another shower and put this.
I feel like, hasn't he done the deodorant bit before? Or one of them has done this before, right? I feel like
I don't know.
This is deja vu. You've never seen this?
No.
Oh, I love this whole sweaty pit stream. They're like, this is how you use deodorant. I wish he would have taken his shirt off. That would have fucking made the day. And he bought a prop pack of cigarettes. Menthols, no less.
This on. And then you got to take another shower and then put this on. You take another shower and you put this on. You take another shower and you put this on. You take another shower and you put this on. If you want, Shanny, I can make a YouTube video and teach you how to lather. I can teach you how to rinse yourself off, how to bathe. I can teach you how to use perfume and all that other stuff and whatnot. Stuff that I don't think you want to understand what those things are. I can teach you how to use laundry detergent. I can teach you how to go to food banks and actually go get food for free. This right here came from a food bank. You can get these are kidney beans that came from a food bank. And you can get this. You can go get chicken parts. Like those big thighs, you can get the legs, you can get the wings. You can go out there and you can get what do you call them things here? The almonds. You can go out there, you can get tomato sauce, you can get spaghetti, you can get powdered milk. It's a lot of things that you can actually get You know what I mean? If you actually get off your lazy rumps and actually go out there and try to do something with yourself. But you know, you guys love being lazy. You love not having anything. Because if you hated it, neither one of you, especially you, Shannon, especially you, since you're so big and strong and you can bench press so much, one of you will be actually out there working and doing your thing. I see some people are trying to compare me to Carrie in the live chat. I don't know.
Yeah, he clearly doesn't know, and so that's enough out of that fucking guy, right? He's like, so the irony of this man trying to call these people out after having a personal feud with them, and then psychologize them as if he didn't have anything to do with the whole unfolding, right? Do you know anything about this?
Okay, here's what I know. Rev used to have money, but not a whole bunch. And it was like some kind of an inheritance or something. Then he hooked up with this woman. And between the two of them, neither one of them know how to earn any money, but they sure blew a load of it real quick. And now they're broke and they're begging for money all the time. That's all I know, really.
Well, yes. And so in the meantime, this guy, G-Man, Gary, gets involved and he comes in under the guise of being a good Samaritan. He's going to help them out. But what happens is he ends up renting a property from them, which he doesn't pay for, and he ends up getting evicted from. And there's like a bunch of drama surrounding that, right? Okay. And so then he ended up suing them for like, I don't know, it was like a wrongful eviction type lawsuit or something like that. But it's just a bunch of like added insanity on top of everything you just mentioned. So, and these are Christian YouTubers. They're all Christian YouTubers. Yeah.
Any chance that they're doing this on purpose just to promote each other's channels?
I'd considered it. Like, but are they in cahoots with the atheist community? Because then you got Drag, Miss Parker, Black Guy TV, a bunch of channels that are secular rarity. They're all devoted to covering this stuff. So yeah, it seems like we could all be like just creating a farce together. But it's a pretty deep one. It's a deep fake if it is. Because there's like actual police reports and shit. Like,
I'm not necessarily saying it's a fake. You know, it could be real. But the way that they're handling it so publicly and stuff, you know.
Well, I think that's the idea. They kind of like riled these people up on social media. Certain characters instigated on social media, and then it got really real in real life. And then they just continued to cover the streams. But these are like the IRL streamers who, you know, every friggin' waking moment, you know, on the interweb. So they got them that way. And then now they're blaming the people who are covering them, like, you know, their interlocutors, for their own bad behavior. Because they're like, well, you know, so-and-so made me do it because they were fucking with me on a live stream. Mm-hmm. It's an actual the devil made me do it kind of type of situation.
Wow. Most people that know me just know that I'm just kind of not into any kinds of games ever in any kind, you know. So most folks just leave me alone on that. I mean, I like conversations like you and several other people, but I'm really not interested in like starting, participating, promoting any kind of drama.
Yeah, I think once it gets too personal, like, I don't know, we're crossing a line. Like certain things, like if you're, I don't know, it's sketchy there. Like there's a fine line. Jason, yeah, I want to extend love to Oz. I know he's going through some shit right now. You know, but yeah,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I just read some stuff he posted. It just sounds like he's having some issues like this, like, you know, just dealing with community building and whatever that means. And you can't please like everybody all the time, and like, that's been my thing. Like, hey, I don't, I'm not like, everybody doesn't need to be my best friend. It's just, it is what it is at the end of the day. Like, but we each just need to do our own thing and try not to step on each other's toes if we can avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be okay.
I like that. But it's weird because in this sphere, like what I was just doing, like I'm just watching somebody else's live review of a live stream, and then suddenly you get all up in that mix. You're like, hey, it's just that. Oh, yeah, it's the same type of thing. It's like TMZ, but on a lower level. Like we're just making it ourselves. Like, oh, look at this interesting character over here. What are they talking about? Is that like the dysfunction, described in like biblical stories? You think, like,
Oh, well, I have an other than standard reading context for the Bible.
yeah.
And I really think that those aren't supposed to be like history lessons or anything like that, which is why sometimes the one in charge doesn't make any sense how they react to a certain set of actions by the main character. So you go like, oh yeah, it makes perfect sense that Cain kills his brother. God gives him a short cussing out, protects him the rest of his life. Like, I'm sorry, what? That doesn't seem like rational or moral or anything close to it. But that's because the translators already had a traditional way to think about it. And that's the way, and I'm not saying they did it on purpose. It's just where their brain was. They translated it that way because of the way they already thought about it. So you say to me something like, so-and-so in the biblical story did whatever thing, and then the punishment or reward was whatever thing, and that's totally inconsistent with any kind of something that sounds like morality. And I'm like, yeah, it totally doesn't sound anything like morality. That's because the translators totally screwed the pooch.
So I'm thinking, I think I've heard you talk about this before too. The Tower of Babel. Origin, myth, or parable meant to explain why the world's people speak different languages. But I've heard people kind of say this is analogous to like the internet because I don't know if that was you particularly talking on this, because it says that God confuses the languages or something like that, and so we're miscommunication, misinformation is introduced, right? Like that's meant to explain that part of what's going on, right?
Well, that's weird that people should say things like that, especially if they haven't actually done the research. But I have, so I say the same thing for completely different reasons, which is really interesting. Like, if you read the King James, it comes out that they baked bricks. But if you did an idea for idea translation, which I have, it ends up that they thoroughly burned within the people the idea of making little white tiles, is what it really reads. It's not about burning bricks. It's about motivating people to make these white tiles. And also, it doesn't actually read one language. Excuse me. It doesn't read one language. The people all spoke one language. What it does read is people spoke the terminate language, like the final language. Of course, that doesn't make sense if there were languages after that, right? And it's about everyone cooperating using this common terminate language, and that's how they can all talk to each other, is through this language. And it's supported by making white tiles that are thin, not thick like a brick at all. And the whole idea was proposed to them that it would be an elevated platform where unknown people could become known. And it was promised that it would be safe and secure, but it turns out to have even though despite all those promises, it created these red slime pits. So
So
That's
this
what-
is
that's
these
an idea
structures
for
are
idea
built out of the
translation.
white tile. That's the
What's that?
significance. These structures are built out of the white tile, is what you're saying. That was the significance of the white tile.
No,
But
the
then
significance of the white tile is that it completed the intended task that burnt in the hearts of people. It's not
Right.
about the tiles using the tiles to build a thing. It's that the tiles are the support for the elevated how does it put it? Elevate, almost like elevated stage.
So this is just like an example of or relativism, right? Like it's just saying that you're going to build this thing with these fancy white tiles, but it turns into a slime pit at the end.
Well, it's not all a slime pit, but it does produce slime pits. Of course, when you read the King James, that came out as slime for mortar. But the idea of mortar isn't there at all. They just interjected that in.
So it's supposed to be teaching how, basic, brick and mortar literal engineering was
No, not at all.
originated.
I don't think at all. See, there is a terminate language that everyone uses, has used on this earth, and it does enable everyone to communicate with everyone who's using the language, and it is propped up on these thin, pale tiles. That is absolutely true. It does have its head in the heavens. That's also true. It was promised that the total of this thing, the total of this elevated platform, which make unknown people famous, that it was promised to be secure, and that it is not secure, and we're using it right now. That is, there are satellites in heaven dependent upon mathematics, the final language, the terminate language, and computer chips and breadboards and stuff like that support that entire system. And I personally have noticed that it's true that there's great things on the internet, and you and I get to talk, and people who were completely unknown became famous because of it. But there's also these slime pits.
What do we do with these slime pits? Or is there? It's just a
Nothing.
statement that they exist.
Yeah, it doesn't. The story doesn't read that we do anything about the slime pits. Actually, we created the slime pits and we keep them. And it's not until the whole system, the whole platform dies, that the slime pits are destroyed. Which is funny because we use the word platform in description of certain parts of the internet.
Yeah, we're on a platform now, right? The streaming platform. Yeah.
And definitely by this streaming platform, unknown people have become famous, and we're told that it would be secure, and it isn't. I mean, it's all 100% true if you just ignore Christianity.
It's interesting because platform in our language now is somewhat synonymous with pedestal, and then you think of a sense of entitlement. Is anyone entitled to have a pedestal or a platform, a soapbox to speak on? Or
Well, every American apparently is.
Yeah.
Or every citizen of the United States is apparently entitled, yeah.
But then you hear all of these different groups complaining about being censored because the terms of service don't agree with their viewpoints. And yeah.
And there's right there, that's the ledge that leads into some slime pit right there.
Dylan, I've never seen you before. This guy's probably a troll. Do what you got to do, moderators.
What does Hotep mean?
You're welcome. I mean, so I believe it's an Egyptian thing. And then there was a reference in a Bruce Campbell movie back in the early '90s or something. Yeah. And, I
Sounds
don't know what
interesting.
it means specifically, but it has something. It's like a god name. It's like one of their deities or something.
All right, cool.
Wait,
He really
I'm
likes
actually,
you.
yeah.
He just called you white, but a god. That's pretty cool.
I have friends in low places. It means peace or contentment, actually. Yeah,
Oh, interesting. So it's about the same as shalom.
right. But it is used as a surname.
Okay. I could read you an idea for idea translation of that part of the text.
Yeah,
But it's all like that, where because of presuppositions and they already had a way that was fixed to that they wanted to think about it, and they translated it in that mindset. All of the translations, I think, are just actually pretty poor. You've heard that, like, the Jewish people say, well, you know, the Christians are wrong about the Old Testament. You suppose they're just blowing smoke when they say that, or maybe they mean it?
well, yeah. I mean, I think there's certainly a school that just doesn't want to admit when they're wrong, but there is significant disagreement. I mean, look at the what the Protestants and there was a whole mess over there. Like they do have legitimate internal conflict, but now I think it's more like their solidarity is to fight against the atheist and the Muslim, and they're trying to find a way to do that and not seem to. It's like when people talk about rewriting history type of shit. I think that's
Oh
what
yeah.
Christianity is trying to do. They're so they, oh well, modern history it's just irrelevant because look at everything else that happened in history. So let's just ignore these facts. You know.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. If you wanted to look this up and read along from like the King James or something, it would be an interesting contrast.
I absolutely
you
can.
want you would? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Which
so
verse?
we're at Genesis 11:1.
Done this before, and the ooh, excuse me. The whole earth was one language and one speech. Oh, this is the one I was referencing. Nice.
Okay, so would you go ahead and read 11:1 there?
I see the whole earth was of one language and one speech. That's
Uh-huh. That's it?
yeah.
Okay, so
That's
what
it.
I did was I have a lot more excuse me. Hold on a second, let me get a water. So I have a lot more words, but that's because I didn't interject a bunch of words. It's because I wrote the root definition and then the etymological root definition. So I end up with like twice as many words, right? But it gives context to it. Like if I say head of an arrow versus head of a human. You know, I had to put these qualifiers on there so you understand what I mean by head, right? Because that's two different kinds of heads, right? So I went ahead and did that, and it really gives you no choice. And I interjected as few words as possible. And here's what you just read, what you actually just read. Here you go, in an idea for idea translation. My desire, it will come to pass and be better for you in the earth, that absolutely every of mankind in the earth will be better when they find the terminate language barrier that is of one way and determined, the final language shore promised to be. Yeah, all that.
Well, that was a lot more words.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think- well, wait. So you're saying they were oversimplifying this concept, or they did not understand how to explain it?
I think they were oversimplifying it, maybe to keep the book fairly small and light, but they definitely didn't give you context of what those words actually meant. Like, what's a key root word there? I guess the part they kept is final language, but if you look into the actual words that's there, it's not the idea of the final language. It's the idea of the termination of languages which reached a barrier. Like you can't go beyond that. There isn't anything beyond that. So it's not all the same language. It's the final language.
Well, I think that would mean more like agreed upon, but that doesn't mean you couldn't go
yes.
beyond. It means that you don't. It sounds like
No,
something
it's
that
claiming you
people
can't go beyond
compromise.
it. No, it's claiming you can't get beyond this language.
Just want to make sure I have the definition.
I mean, that's a big claim, right?
Just one typo, of course. Okay, yeah. Okay, I can see that. Okay, so there's no language beyond this language. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain of the land in Shinar, and they dwelt there. I don't know where that is.
Right. So in the translation I've done, it comes out, not it came to pass, but it will come to pass that in the departing, preventing eastward, that's a reference to a future prophecy when people leave and they go toward the east. By the way, if you'd read from the beginning, you would have found out that the Garden of Eden is westward. So this is out of the Garden of Eden is what it's referring to there. And they will find out and breach the plane of the firmament of heaven. So they will find the differentiation and they'll go through it, which is entering into the land of two rivers, and they will tarry or spend time and inhabit time therein. So it's like they'll pierce into the land of two rivers, and they'll spend time in the land of two rivers before they leave the garden. Of course, it's only one verse.
Okay, so the garden is in the west.
Yeah.
They have to move to the east, and they come upon this place. You could even say it's like a fork in the river, right? There's like to say two rivers, that just means the river split in two, right? And then they hung out there for a while.
Yeah. So, but context would help if a person understood the description of the Garden of Eden was the whole earth. I can show that in the same way I'm doing this.
So they went east of the earth itself. They're no longer on the planet?
Yeah, east is always heaven in the stories. Like north is away from south. South is bad. West is away from heaven. Going east is going into heaven. Every story. In fact, if you look,
think there's a
heaven. I think it's just an expression. I think it's an expression, but it is interesting how much it's carried over into other stories. Like, for instance, any movie that you watch where the hero has to like geographically position themselves, or the important killing shot that won the war. The plane comes out of the east. Gandalf comes out of the east. The hero comes out of the east. I mean, it's really prominent in our society, actually.
That's true, but then like you have the manifest destiny is always the idea of moving west, right? Expansion is always westward. Like, but that's like
Sure,
that all
sure,
comes
but that's
after.
no that involves the trials, the tribulations, the wildernesses, the hard part, the hero's journey. That's all going to be westward,
Okay.
if that makes sense. I mean, it's the opposite of the ease and comfort and completion of the task.
So do you think that's
Anyway.
like temptation? Like we're tempted to move westward when we should be going east, according to the stories?
Okay, now that's defined enough. We've gone far enough in that conversation. We're going to have to talk about some specific culture. It's not going to be that universal.
Okay.
That's an interesting thought, if that's fair.
Yeah. Sorry. 3. They said to one another, "Go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." This is what we were just talking about. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar.
Right.
And they
Mankind.
said, "Go, let us."
Oh, sorry. Is there more? No, it should end at mire right there, right? Or slime. What's the last word you read there in that verse?
Yeah, the very last one was slime for mortar.
Yeah, very good, very good. Mankind promised extent mankind. So some section promised everyone who exists companionship, ascribing them to make white tile. It does not read brick at all. And kindled it utterly within them, and burned it thoroughly inside them, so that it would come to pass. Which, that's just talking about like motivating people. Burn inside is a common way to say that, their heart wanted something. And it came to pass, and we still use it that way, in fact. And it came to pass that they made white tile. The made white tile built troubled slime pits of desire to come to pass, like pits of red mire.
Is it done in a rhyme in that way, in the traditional language?
Yeah. It's funny that our words, our language picks up any bit of the rhyme. In their language, it picks up the rhyme really well.
Yeah, I was reading that about Homer as well. I guess Homer's works are done, and it doesn't really make as much sense when you translate it to English. But when you look at the originals, it's like, oh yeah, it was totally like written out as a limerick.
Yeah.
And they said, "Go, we're at 4 now. Let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth."
Right on. And they had promised the ascribed buildup would be, untranslated word here. Sorry, can't tell you what that word right there is. Guarded for everyone, a great tower, elevated as a stage and a pulpit, whose head is lofty in the air, and it wrought them conspicuous position by names and regard, despite being scattered abroad throughout. That is, the people were not together in one place. Regarded in sight, perfected everything in the firm earth, and perfected in sight everything to all whosoever was in the firm earth.
The firm earth, meaning not in the seas, on land?
Well, the word there is eretz, which they commonly translate in most translations as just dirt or earth or land. But I wrote the literal definition. All these are literal definitions that I'm writing right here. It literally reads firm earth.
Which could only be to differentiate from sea, right? I mean, in our context.
Well, it also differentiates firm earth from slime pits, firm earth from swamps, firm earth from rivers and lakes.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That makes sense. Okay. 5, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. Is there something? Why is the English improper? Do they not? They don't have a past
Because
tense?
it's not modern English.
Right.
So that they're trying to stay to. Are you reading from the King James version? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, we're in KJV.
Okay. So that's actually early modern English, which no one speaks anymore around the whole planet. So like when you see that ed at the end of built, like builded, that ed right there is supposed to be giving an idea of finality. Whereas if you see a th, that's the idea of continuous, like if act, jump, right? Well, if you jump once, that's jump. But if you jump and jump and jump and jump and jump and jump and jump, they would write jumpeth.
Yeah, I jumpeted. Yeah.
No, not yeah. I jumpeted once, but to get from point A to point B 300 meters away, I will jumpeth. That's the way they wrote stuff. Yeah, jumpeth, which means could be several iterations of the same act.
6, and the Lord said, "Behold,
let me read 5 before you move on to 6, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
you have another one? Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, I wanted to read 5. You already did, but I'd like to read it.
Yeah.
Then descended Yahweh and came down and beheld the guarded city of excitement, anguish, and terror, and the emerging sign of the magnified tower they therein built up sons had built. So it's the idea of children coming together in a unified goal, and God noticed the unified goal had been completed. And the people there who completed the unified goal were of a city that is guarded, and they have excitement, anguish, and terror. I know all that's left out of the King James.
So, do you think God waits for the task to be completed? Like he's waiting for the time when people come together to complete the task, and then
that's what I gleaned from that. That it's like waiting for us to accomplish certain things and actually watching till we get the thing accomplished.
So, and in your model, I think you have, and correct me if I'm wrong. So the God or the being that we're talking about, or the group of beings, are non-intervening, right? So there's no predetermination in this model. It's
to me, as far as I've read the whole Bible in this mindset. To me, the Christ is predetermined. Everyone else has some amount of free will.
What do you mean when you say the Christ is predetermined? Like,
well, he's told who he is, and then he's given a script. It's a pretty loose script, but it's a script, and he's asked to follow the script. You know, do this, then do this, then do this. It's going to result in you getting killed. I got your back, like that.
So he had to play a certain part, and that was his role. And then yeah, okay.
Now, how exactly he does it, or what he says at what time, that all looks like it's got some amount of like personal freedom built into it. But overall, what he's supposed to do, yeah, that's totally a predetermined thing.
Well, it makes sense because nobody really wants to be tortured to death at the end of the day for being a good dude, right? Like that would suck.
Well, this is why the Christians argue over predeterminism and grace, right? It's because both stories are in the text. It's just the really proud ones, and you'll notice they are the more proud ones, tend to think that they are predetermined. Well, that's because it's got all these demands and promises and speaks about great rewards. Of course, if they're rewards to the Christ, that makes sense. So the predetermined one gets great reward. You see what's causing the argument there? But they won't, in their hubris and lack of humility, they won't understand that they're an ignorant person extended grace. And then you'll find the more moderate or modest people, they think it's grace. Interesting, huh?
And grace is pretty much what, in this sense, like it's synonymous with humility or empathy or something like that, right?
Sure. That if there were a God of any kind or higher being of any kind, and they saw our situation, and that we don't even know enough to become like space travelers or anything, we're pretty young society, compared to like the universe and stuff. Then they would see us as ignorant and innocent and unable to really do what we need to cause our own survival, which to me looks pretty spot on considering the condition of the earth. Like, Agent Orange and nuclear waste pollution in the oceans and on like that. Global warming.
We wouldn't do that. We would never Agent Orange or nuclear waste pollution.
Yeah, right. Why would we do that?
All right. I'll continue on here to the next one. 6.
Yeah.
And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Okay, so if they get
I think they couldn't hide some of the intent in this one. That it's talking about them coming together and being cooperative and being able to do whatever they think of. So you can see that in the King James, yeah?
Yeah. If we can all just work together, can't we all just get along, man? Yeah.
Right on.
It's right.
So
there.
I think that is so prominent in the text that you can't help but see that, I think. But in a more direct translation, spoke Jehovah a promise, because it actually literally has the same word twice, which is speak or promise. So spoke Jehovah a promise. Behold, the people held in darkness. The people have gotten one way or another to the obvious terminate edge of the earth and made perfect everything one certain way for the obvious terminate edge of the earth. These sick and grievous people broke what I put together and adorned everlasting in time, going forth with nothing restrained to walk what way they themselves devised to perform.
So I notice something very consistent. In your interpretation of Genesis. I don't know if this reads throughout, but there is a sense of finality at the beginning in your reading, where we don't hear like you're using the term. You're using the word terminate, right?
Yeah.
Which has a very specific meaning.
Yeah. It means terminate, same thing as termination or the end of a thing. Yeah, right. Definitely.
So the beginning is definitely prophesying the end.
I believe so, yes. I'm convinced of it. Which is why you always hear me say, I don't think this is a history lesson. Like, it's really not about the history of the planet at all. It's all about the end of the planet.
That's interesting when you think about a story that would because most stories are trying to kind of veil or be somewhat coy about the ending, right? They want to allude to the ending without giving it away directly. But this story in particular seems to want to point to the ending at every turn. It's like, it's all going to end,
That's what I see. In fact, I see very little, or actually, I see almost nothing about what time we spend here, except for that it's hard and painful and they're suffering. But it doesn't seem to go into any detail about our time here. And that's not the point. The point of the text doesn't even seem to be our time here. but our time of change away from here.
You don't mean like the out of body experience type of time away.
There's a lot of ways you could take it, but since there's a description including decorations, colors, sizes, the exterior color of a thing, then I think those are real solid objects, and all of those descriptions are in the text describing heaven. You know, if I said, well, what color is the outside of the Christian ethereal plane, different universe heaven? What color is the outside of that? Who the hell? What do you mean it has an outside or a color? What? Like, why are you even asking that? But
It's an opaque blue bubble. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, well, of course. No, but it uses the colors of stones, which a jasper is the same thing as printer red or magenta or the color of majesty. I don't think coincidentally. And that it's I've got my graphic up right now. It describes this thing that I use as an icon, and it talks about, you know, the faces on them, the wing count, the size, the color. It gives all that, the shape. So you can't have like decorations on the outside of an ethereal plane. You know what I'm saying? that wouldn't even make sense.
So it's all an equation.
Yeah, it's very, in fact, it's a solvable mathematical set of problems. I went ahead and worked them out, and it's describing physical objects that people would experience in a very, at least to them, real way. Like they would believe it was real.
But just because it makes sense doesn't mean that it's true, right? We can use
absolutely,
to explain real phenomena. So
no. I mean, Harry Potter is consistent. Stephen King's novels are consistent. That doesn't make a thing true. It's a way to disprove something as untrue.
Well, like when you say gravity doesn't exist. No, technically gravity doesn't exist in the way we think of existence, but, you know, we can't, you know, outsmart gravity. That's not going to happen. So
you lost me there. What are you talking about?
Well, gravity is not a thing, right? It's a force. It's not a thing. It's not. So like I exist, you exist. Gravity doesn't exist in the same way that you or I exist. Gravity acts upon us. It determines our interactions, but it's not a tangible thing the way that you and I are. Just like morality is not a tangible thing the way that you and I are.
Oh, that's better. An emotional thing is better, yeah. Because the way that most Christians think about heaven is it's more of an emotional or spiritual place, not a physical place. But
I also think they think of it as being a fixed thing. These are fixed things in space that doesn't make sense in that line of reasoning.
No, it doesn't make sense when the text claims things like heaven arrives. You know, well, what does that mean? We travel, the whole planet travels to heaven, or does that mean heaven travels to us? Well, it comments on that, saying the Earth is in one place, which we're locked into a 16 light minute orbit. We are stuck in one place. Like, what are you going to do? Drive the Earth away from the sun? You can't.
Yeah, next bus to Mars.
Right.
Okay. All right. I think we got it on there. Not much disagreement. To 7, let us go down and there confound their language, and they may not understand one another's speech. So this is the angel speaking, right? I believe.
Somebody not us speaking. Yeah.
Okay. Let us confound their language. So the gods willingly they want to confuse humans here.
That's one way to read it. I know that's highly traditional, accepted. What
How
I
do you
came
see-
out with, what's that?
Oh, I was asking, how do you see it?
Bring dissension and confound them, because those there mingled with the obvious terminate edge. They hearken not to the obvious terminate edge, each one teaching their neighbor. Which did that idea of each one teaching their neighbor didn't show up in the King James at all. They just left the entire idea out. Don't know why.
So, because they want to go live on the edge, let them do it, and hopefully they teach their neighbor to
No,
be better.
that they already each one taught their neighbor, and it's part of that cooperative effort that brings them to the terminate edge.
So it's by human cooperation. That's part of the whole seeking knowledge thing, right? As long as
Yeah.
we seek knowledge, we're like further and further away, right?
Further away from what?
From the source of truth.
No. That's just Christianity. It claims that.
Okay, so you don't interpret it that way.
No. In fact, it encourages reasoning and logic and discovery and learning. It encourages all of that throughout the stories.
But okay, so we're going to a different story. But I mean, in short, the tree in the garden, right? We've gone through this. So what? Why do they say knowledge? Why do they interpret it as knowledge? Why do they have?
Because it literally says the word knowledge there. That's not much interpreting. The Hebrew word there means, knowledge, to know.
But there's a sense of fear instilled in that word.
Really?
more
Where?
Well, just my general sense of Abrahamic faith, right? Like that's.
I don't know
their
what
whole
that has to do with the text. The problem is I don't know what the practitioner has to do with the text.
No, it doesn't. I guess it just confuses me. So I don't know. I get hung up on it.
Well, let's see if that's even consistent within itself and in an internal critique. According to the Bible, is it good to know what is good and evil? Or is it bad to know what's good and evil? Doesn't most of the book preach on and on about not doing evil and doing good and knowing the difference?
I think it's contradictory, at least in the standard, English version, the King James, right? Like they both have the same message that says, it says first that the sin is to eat from or partake of the knowledge of good and evil or whatever.
No, it doesn't read that. You got that from Christians, not from the text.
That's not what the text says.
No, not even close. What it does say consistently throughout all of the Bible is there is evil, there is good. There is knowing the difference between evil and good. Knowing the difference between evil and good is a godly thing. That's consistent, even in that story. It's just the Christians don't choose to read what's actually there. They read a translation and they consider that the Word of God.
Right. And then in some other portion of the text, it says that God commands what is good and what is evil. So,
sure, absolutely.
Just to make everything more confusing.
No, it's not. It's not more confusing. It's just that we've been around too many Christians too long. That's all. For instance, if you ask a Christian what the word "yet" means, well, it's something like a thing that hasn't happened, or in spite of this other event. He laid his hand on the stove, yet did not burn himself. Right? That's like in spite of the fact that it was like a magic trick. Wow, he didn't get burnt. Or well, I haven't gone to the grocery store yet, which means, I'm going to. So that's your two options for the word yet and what that word means, right? So it's either in spite of the fact or something that's going to happen, right? So there you go. Then they ignore in the Garden of Eden where the angels say the following: man has become as one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, yet that he put out his hand and accept eternal life and become like exactly us. Well, wait. Why are they being offered a reward that was like an eventuality or just hadn't happened yet? You know? And all they have to do is just like accept it, put out their hand and take it. Why is that a punishment? Because in the rest of the Bible, the idea of eternal life is a reward, not a punishment. So what's going on there? Well, they're being given a reward for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's obvious in the text, it's unavoidable. You just have to read like 2 more paragraphs to find that part.
And yeah, I mean, okay, so when we look at it that way, then there's a lot of passages that are interpreted, as you say, in a futuristic way, right? Like, so you have to look at the past tense of it. I guess studying the language would be helpful there for me. I trust your scholarship here.
Well, I can read it to you directly, word for word. You know, the ideas are actually there.
Well, let's finish the passage, and then we got two more here, and then we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where were you? 7, I think.
We just finished 7. We're at 8 and 9 is the end of the chapter we're in here.
Okay, go ahead.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and he left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. And there's the...
Oh, you went ahead and read both of them. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty much one subject anyway. All right. Because this is the end of the last sentence, because there's no break there, and why they made it into 2 sentences, I don't know. And scattered them abroad by Yahweh, and he broke to pieces the people abroad, emerging as a governing entity. That is, he emerged as a governing entity and broke them up. They openly regarded the presence of Yahweh. So like people saw it openly. It wasn't a secret or anything. Absolutely everyone in the firmament, and they forsook to build again that guarded city. Throughout the establishing, therefore, it was proclaimed the conspicuous obvious name, proclaimed doubtlessly by Jehovah, and he confounded them from the terminate edge, completely, every person on the firm earth, and they were scattered abroad upon the face of all the earth. Of course, that caused some problems in the translations. They left a few words out.
Yeah, my first question is, what does it mean to be confounded upon the terminate edge? I heard that, and then I went, what? So what?
Confounded from.
What does that mean? What?
Kept away from, confused,
Okay,
away from.
So it was like a type of deception, but used to aid them, to keep them away from that.
Deception isn't okay. I'll accept the word deception. It's a little bit of a stretch to put it that way, but confounded, more like a puzzle you're unable to solve, something like that. It's just taken out of your hands. You're made to where you can't do it. And this is the same terminate edge of the firmament that was mentioned before, which you don't have to read it the way I do, but I read that as, space, like the top of the atmosphere. the terminate edge of the planet.
The final frontier.
Yeah, the beginning of space. Yeah. I mean, that's how I read it, is it's talking about the beginnings of space, which is how people went to just on the other side of the beginnings of space, and they spent time there. That is, we've got a space program. We ain't going very far, but we got a space program, and we got ships, and people spend time, in low orbit and stuff, and all that seems fine.
And so the very last verse, scatter them upon the face of the earth. It sounds like you translated that almost the same way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not using different words here. I'm using the same Jewish words. And I'm not taking anything away or adding anything to it. So it's just a different attitude in how you're reading it when you do the translation.
So when I think of that, I think of like picking up a pair of dice, or something, and like throwing them across, and seeing where they land. Like that's not what we're talking about. Or is it just a random?
Oh, I think it's making to where the terminate language is not usable through the elevated platform, and making all that not work anymore. Which, by the way, if you turn to the book of Revelation and read the signs of the arrival of heaven, it would destroy like infrastructure, electricity. It would eliminate those things. Governments, it would topple governments.
Yahweh doesn't seem to achieve anything by this, at least not in the story, right? It's all
nothing's been done here. It's just like observations about how far we've gotten, and then it doesn't talk about what is done. It just talks about the result of what happened. So this is just like it's just a sign of our advancement, if you will, I think.
Interesting. And what of all the uncivilized creatures out there, moving about us?
Well, it's absolutely true that not everyone on the planet has internet, obviously, but those of us who do and who count on that, if you drop the power grid, there's no internet.
The internet, I don't know where that is. Never been there before.
Where it is, I saw on a South Park episode where they found where it was plugged in, because one day somebody tripped over the cord and unplugged it. They plugged it back in so the internet could work again. It was a huge effort for the boys, because they had to locate where the internet was too.
We have 3. I didn't realize this last time I was here. I don't know if they upgraded, but we have 3 different Wi-Fi networks. So I logged into all 3. So it will hopefully
logged into all 3. Can you even do that?
Well, yeah, it's supposed to like update to the best available one. Oh, now there's 4.
Okay. Oh,
5? Shit, there's a bunch of Wi-Fi's over here. I
You're like a housing. Are you in like a heavily housed area?
No, I'm in a hotel. Yeah.
Oh, well, that explains it.
Yeah. It's good. I got a balcony and an extra bed for no apparent reason. It cost me like $5 more a night, so it's like cool. Works for me. Yeah. I got it tonight and tomorrow on credit, so I'll worry about that one next time.
Well, you're just spending the weekend in a hotel? Is that what you're saying?
Is this the weekend? No,
well,
yeah.
Sort of. Extended weekend. Sure.
Yeah, it's part of my weekend, yeah. Yeah, I decided I've earned it.
All right, good for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would. I don't know if you even want to listen to this. I would read you the story of the Garden of Eden in this translation as well.
Go ahead.
It doesn't come out like.
I'm up for it.
Okay. I'm going to start at. Let's see, where do we start at? 2:7 of Genesis, I suppose. And Jehovah's angels formed mankind of the pulverized debris from the existent Adam. That's interesting. Like it's like saying there was an Adam before the Adam here. And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life through a woman in birth pangs, and mankind became a fully living soul. Yeah, they complete the whole birth pangs. They just cut that right out of the text for the King James. And the Jehovah angels had planted a garden eastward in Eden. That's supposed to say westward. That's a typo. Sorry. Correct that real quick. Westward in Eden, and they emplaced the man whom they had formed. That is, the garden was there and the man was put in it. And out of the ground made the Jehovah angels to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And a radiant flood of waters went out into Eden, delight of Jehovah, Eden, delight of Jehovah, to refresh the garden eastward. And from there it was parted and became into four principles. The name of the first principle was called scattered increase, that which returned the whole land of the travailing circle, where there is shimmering water and fair weather. Now, when you read the King James, that comes out Pishon, Heshon, Tigris, and Euphrates. They're untranslated words. If you translate them, you get this. The name of the first principle was called scattered increase, that which returned the whole land of the travailing circle, where there is shimmering water and fair weather. And the shimmering water and fair weather of that land is good. It is a pearl divided, and there are pale family building blocks located there. And the name of the second principle is called bursting forth to draw up, the same that encompasses the whole land of those in darkness. And the name of the third principle is called rapid ancients went eastward. What's that?
When you use the pale building blocks, is that similar to the tiles we were talking about before, or is that a different thing?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, pale building block is the same as the word bane or son or progeny. It's a building block for building a family. In fact, if you look into it enough, the kind of pale block that it uses is sardonyx through onyx, which is pink through black.
Okay. Got you. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Because the things that build families, that kind of building block is pink through black. It actually is. And the name of the second principle is called bursting forth to draw up, the same that encompasses the whole land of those in darkness. And the name of the third principle is called rapid ancients went eastward and took a successful step. And the fourth principle, breaking forth in fruitfulness. So all of that so that it breaks forth in fruitfulness. And the Jehovah angels took mankind and put him into the Garden of Eden to praise Jehovah and keep the garden. And the Jehovah angels declared of mankind, saying, of every tree of the garden thou might freely eat, but of the affixed tree, they left out the word affixed right there, like set and immovable. The affixed tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die the death. Yes, they left out any word death right there. Well, this die the death is repetitive in the text. It doesn't mean failure of the body. It means old ideas that you survive through. So that's what die the death means. It means repentance. And they were both spiritually naked, the man and the woman, and they were not ashamed of it. Now the Snake Nebula was more subtle than any sign of the zodiac, which Jehovah angels had established. And space spoke to the woman, saying, hey, hath God said you will not be nourished of any established fact of the garden? Yes, they changed fact to tree. And the woman said about the Snake Nebula, we may be nourished of all the established facts of the garden. That's science right there. But of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, angels have said, you will not be nourished by it, neither will you even touch it, or yourself will die. That is, a sense of self will perish if you eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which makes sense to me, actually. And the snake nebula again spoke to women. Ye shall surely not die. Angels do know that in the day you are nourished from the facts of good and evil, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. That's consistent. And then women saw that the tree good for nourishment, and it's pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make wise. And she took of the fruit of it, and was nourished, and motivated also men with her, and he was nourished. Awesome. It's amazing. It's great. Learning stuff. And the spiritual eyes of them both were opened, and they knew they were naked. And they sewed split-leaved and spiny-backed fig leaves together, and made themselves poor aprons. And they heard the audible voice of Jehovah. Now it's audible. Now they hear it. Of Jehovah's angels walking in the garden at the end of the 6th day. And men and women hid themselves from the presence of the Jehovah angels among the trees in the garden. And the Jehovah angels called out to mankind and said, where are you? And mankind said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was ignorant and I hid myself. Of course, you know, a real thing that we've been traditionally calling heaven shows up in our sky. This is pretty realistic what people will do. Hide and freak out. And angels said, who told you that you were naked? Have you now eaten of the tree that I declared you could not eat of under your own accord? And mankind said, women, who you gave to be with me, motivated me to be nourished of knowledge, and I was nourished. And the Jehovah angel said to the women, what is this you have done? And women said, the outer space snake nebula and all of space tempted me, and I did become nourished of knowledge. Which, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, Kevin, but there's a good number of unrecognized females. I think they even made a movie about it, didn't they? The Women of NASA? I don't remember what they called it.
It sounds familiar to me. So, okay. Jason, good night. And good luck. And okay, so the snake nebula is the basis, the foundation for the serpent in the garden, right? Because they look at the sky, they're like, look at all this stuff, and
right.
Then they hold men accountable for everything, right? And like, now I'm over here.
Well, we can't lie and say many men aren't motivated by women. We know that many men are. In fact, I think there's a good number of men, a good percentage of men, who aren't motivated by much else besides women.
You don't think all people are like, even if they're like gay or queer or whatever, would still be somehow motivated biologically? Like an anti-natalist is still biologically motivated. They're just in the other direction from somebody who's motivated towards procreation, right?
You mean, is everyone biologically motivated in some direction? Right. Yeah, okay,
well,
sure.
No, in some direction, yeah. Not the same direction necessarily.
Well, yeah, we go in all kinds of different directions, but this is speaking in great generalities about people on the earth and how stuff gets done. It's not that specific. It's not talking about one or two people.
No, it can't be. It can't be. But if you're talking about like issues like abortion issues, say you have somebody who's pro-life versus somebody who's pro-choice, and then it's like, okay, well, what are their motivations? And then on the pro-life side, it's usually the ick factor. Oh, we got, I don't want to see babies die, and we can't kill babies. Oh no, God doesn't want us to do that. And then you have the pro-choice side where they're just like, well, we just want people to be able to live their lives and not have to deal with all these complicated problems and just move along with things. And then there's like Okay, so, and then the only factor between those two is whether you believe that God gave each fetus the right to be born.
What?
Right? Like you have no other argument, right?
Okay, I know this. Everyone's driven by their chemistry and experience and how they judge reality. Everybody is. What does that mean to some certain individual? And can I predict how they're going to act? Oh, hell no, I'm not even going to try.
You can't predict how they're going to act, but you can make certain assumptions based on their the beliefs that they espouse, right? Like
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Somewhat, but everyone has special qualifiers for special situations, and everything's actually treated subjectively. And you can always get someone to admit that they're subjective.
Do you think most people would adhere to that?
A lot of people don't want to think they are, but they are anyway.
So it doesn't matter if they think they are; they're just kind of stuck in the system.
Well, we have subjective experiences, and we judge things subjectively because we have no choice.
So why am I not a brain in a vat?
I don't know. You tell me why you're not a brain in a vat. I can't show that you are or are not because my opinion's subjective. It's not objective. I can't show you that.
Oh no. Everything's melting away. I feel like coming on again. What is this? Okay, so this has been another rousing episode of Me and My Balls with Richard
Can you
Madsen.
juggle? Because you happen to have like 3 of them.
No, I only have 2, but yes, I do. I juggle a bit.
I've never tried. I mean, seriously tried.
Off the neighbors. Shit.
Oh, look at that.
And I dropped my balls.
That
any
happens.
shills?
I've heard that babies do that at some certain age.
Oh yeah. They
Their
just
balls
set
drop too.
down to the do you have any shows
Chilling.
coming up, Richard? Yeah.
Sure. Let's see. In one of the coming Sundays, probably the 20. Sorry, today's the 27th. Probably the 29th of May, I'll be on Atheist Edge. We're just going to have a casual talk about belief systems. Myself and, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. I don't know how to say his name. Zach. What?
Kaz?
Kaz.
Yeah.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
See, my brain was reversing it because it's not a real word. I was trying to go Zach or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to be on Atheist Edge. Of course, Tuesdays and Wednesdays I've got Math Pig in the early evening, and about the beginning of lunch on Wednesdays we got Mac the Human and Zebra. And thanks for letting me show.
Amazing. I love it. And much love to y'all. I got Jason, Jody, Dylan, whoever you are. I'm still skeptical about you. Skyworks, William, of course, Richard Madsen, Sammy. Thanks to everybody. Be well. Much love. Be kind. And I don't know.